It's Friday, December 5th, 2008, and it's got to be 420 somewhere in the world. I'm your host, Radical Russ Belville. Produced and distributed by the National Organization for the Reform of Marijuana Laws in Washington, D.C., this is your NORML Daily Audio Stash, the growing truth about cannabis. Welcome to the most popular podcast regarding marijuana in all of America and all the world, featuring interviews with scientists, politicians, doctors, prohibition policy activists, regular cannabis consumers, musicians, and NORML staff and NORML's board of directors, along with music and comedy no other podcast can offer. You can always find out more about our show at our website, stash.norml.org, and continue the education and conversation on our blog as well. We're ending marijuana prohibition with education, one listener at a time. The podcasting and blogging technology for the NORML Daily Audio Stash is provided by Red Aphid Interactive Media. For your professional web design needs, visit redaphid.com. Good day, Stashers, and welcome to the podcast. Happy Repeal Day. On December 5th, 1933, Utah became the 36th state to ratify the 21st Amendment to the Constitution, thus repealing the national prohibition on alcohol enacted by the 18th Amendment and ending almost 15 years of the so-called Noble Experiment. 75 years later, the descendants of the Untouchables and the Bootleggers continue their battles in the ignoble experiment that is the 71 years of cannabis prohibition. It only took our forefathers a generation to understand that the prohibition of alcohol fostered an increase in crime, corruption, and death. Facing an economic Great Depression, they realized they could no longer afford to police and prosecute the thousands of speakeasies and millions of clandestine drinkers for their popular personal vice. Politicians followed the will of the people through the enormous political task of passing constitutional amendments to first enact, then repeal, alcohol prohibition. Yet after 4 generations of cannabis prohibition and rising popular support for ending it, our politicians cannot even muster the votes to end federal raids on the legal users of cannabis for medical purposes in California. The current prohibition of cannabis is demonstrably more harmful and costly to society than alcohol prohibition ever was, yet the majority of the public and the vast majority of the politicians still refuse to consider the regulated sales and responsible use of cannabis by adults. Despite study after study after study recommending at least a decriminalization of cannabis, prohibition remains. Is it a question of numbers? So many people drank in the 20s and that it couldn't be ignored, but so few people smoke pot, 14.4 million of us, that we can ignore them? Is it a question of culture? Alcohol drinking has been with American culture since the first ships landed at Plymouth, but cannabis smoking wasn't really a part of mainstream American culture, and even today maintains a counterculture status. Or is it a question of greed? Too many entrenched interests in business, law enforcement, government, and even on our side, from the kingpin to the dime bag dealer, have a financial stake in maintaining cannabis prohibition. Whatever the reason, it is well past time to repeal it. The repeal of alcohol prohibition 75 years ago today doesn't mean that alcohol is legal everywhere in the United States. There are still several dry counties where one cannot buy an alcoholic beverage. And Utah, that state that triggered the repeal of alcohol prohibition 75 years ago today, still has some of the most restrictive alcohol regulations in the country. So too, the repeal of federal penalties for cannabis, as in Barney Frank's H.R. 5843 bill, would allow the states and counties to set their own restrictions on cannabis. That's my take on Repeal Day, and I've got some quotes in the blog from Ethan Nadelman and from Radley Balco from their op-eds today in the Wall Street Journal and Fox News, respectively, on the same subject of Repeal Day. Speaking of Repeal Day, On our interview segment today, we're going to be bringing back George Rohrbacher, NORML Board of Directors member from Washington State, to talk about alcohol prohibition and how it differed from the cannabis prohibition today. Also, a little snippet of audio from Allison Chin Holcomb, who was NORML's recipient of the Pauline Sabin Award at this year's NORML conference. Pauline Sabin, of course, was an important figure in helping to end alcohol prohibition 75 years ago, and Allison has some great words to say about that. Also, of course, today is our celebrity entertainment report from celebstoner.com's Steve Bloom. He's joining us today to talk about the marijuana busts in the NFL, as well as what's been happening on TV with regards to cannabis. We've got our hemp headlines, your regular musical break, and all the good stuff you've come to expect from your NORML daily audio stash.
Hello, I'm Paul Stanford from the Hemp and Cannabis Foundation, or THCF. Medical marijuana is legal in 13 states today, and THCF has clinics in 8 of those states. Our doctors help qualified patients obtain an authorization for medical marijuana in their state. Patients are eligible for medical marijuana with a history of either severe chronic pain and or nausea, cancer, AIDS or HIV, hepatitis, glaucoma, seizure disorders like epilepsy, chronic muscle spasms such as multiple sclerosis or asthma, neurodegenerative diseases such as Alzheimer's, and gastrointestinal disorders like IBS or Crohn's disease. If you or someone you know has one of these conditions, our doctors will help you obtain a permit for medical marijuana. THCF Medical Clinics has offices in Washington State, Oregon, California, Colorado, Hawaii, Nevada, Montana, and now Michigan. Call 1-800-723-0188 or go to the web at hemp.org or 1-800-723-0188.
Now it's time to take a look at the latest stories about marijuana from news organizations across America and around the world in our NORML daily audio stash, Hemp Headlines. Michiganders go to clinic seeking pot to dull pain. From the Detroit Free Press. Michigan became the 13th state to allow the use of medical marijuana to treat debilitating illnesses after voters approved it in November. A licensed physician must grant approval before patients can use the otherwise illegal drug. The patients waiting in the Southfield office either wouldn't or couldn't get approval from their regular doctor, so they were at the opening of the Hemp and Cannabis Foundation Medical Clinic's new location in Southfield. THCF Medical Clinics, a nonprofit headquartered in Oregon, employs 7 doctors in 8 states solely to sign off on medical marijuana use. John Smith, age 33, of Monroe, was trying to find relief from back pain stemming from a 1998 car accident, and he doesn't want to use painkillers anymore. Quote, "I've seen so many people dying on pills," he said, "and that's all the doctors push on you is the pills. Sometimes I think it's in my head, and they're just keeping me doped up on pills." End quote. Charles Snyder III, age 31, of Flint, suffers from nail patella syndrome, a hereditary condition that causes kidney issues and painful bone defects. Quote, "When I use cannabis, it doesn't take it 100% away," said Snyder, who collected signatures to help put a measure legalizing medical use of marijuana on the November ballot. "It doesn't put me in a zombie-like state like OxyContin," end quote. Eric Eisenbud, a licensed ophthalmologist, examined each of the patients Thursday. He interviewed them, reviewed their medical records, checked their blood pressure, and listened to their heart before handing out authorizations. Wait a minute. An ophthalmologist who recommends cannabis is named Dr. Eisenbud? You've got to be kidding me. That's like a researcher on drugs and alcohol named Dr. Earlywine. Whoops. Well, in addition to helping 40,000 people get their medical marijuana recommendations in now 8 states, the THC Foundation's clinics are sponsors of this blog and podcast. Thanks to Paul Stanford for helping so many sick, disabled, and sense-threatened Americans, and to allowing me to bring you the growing truth about cannabis. Amsterdam fights marijuana crackdown. From the Associated Press. Amsterdam, the Netherlands. Amsterdam will fight national efforts to crack down on marijuana cafes arguing that the city's establishments are so strictly regulated that it is unnecessary to comply with a government ban on having them near schools. Mayor Job Cohen's promise to lobby the Justice Ministry to give Amsterdam an exception came after city leaders overwhelmingly voted to challenge the issue. They argue the cafes are already so closely watched, they don't need new rules to keep children away. The challenge comes only days after a separate national ban on psychedelic mushrooms went into effect. Amsterdam also opposed that move and has so far declined to enforce it. The Bulldog is one of the cafes in Amsterdam that was threatened under this ban on coffee shops within 250 meters of a school. These coffee shop owners are relentless about IDing the customers who come in because they know an underage person caught with cannabis or mushrooms in their shop would mean an end to their business. That's the advantage of a regulated market, is that there is incentive for sellers to follow the rules. Tommy Chong prosecutor won't resign, as customary, when Obama takes office. From the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. Despite a new administration coming into power, U.S. Attorney Mary Beth Buchanan said she plans to stick around. She said yesterday, quote, "It doesn't serve justice for all the U.S. attorneys to submit their resignations all at one time," end quote. U.S. attorneys serve at the discretion of the president and may be hired and fired at will, although their appointments must be confirmed by the Senate. When a new president is elected, U.S. attorneys of both parties generally tender their resignations. Instead, the Republican said she plans to continue her work in the Western District of Pennsylvania. Now, we all remember Mary Beth Buchanan from her prosecution of Tommy Chong for being caught in a DEA sting selling glass bongs over the internet. Radley Balco's been paying attention, real close attention, to some of the other notable Buchanan cases. Check the link to his post that we have at our blog, stash.normal.org. But I'll just summarize by saying, in addition to imprisoning hippie movie stars for selling glass, she's also been busting people for filming and writing about sex, and refusing to free a doctor falsely accused by 5 proven liars. It's a good thing there is no real crime in Western Pennsylvania for Mary Beth to worry about. Geez, with a resume of proven law enforcement prioritization and effectiveness like this, you'd think she was running for drug czar. And speaking of drug czar, I'd also urge you to check out the blog to see the National Black Police Association, in coalition with AIDS groups, medical marijuana activists, drug reform networks, gay and lesbian groups, and other groups. Well, they've all called preemptively for President-elect Barack Obama to not pick Jim Ramstad as his drug czar. Check out their open letter at our blog at stash.normal.org.
Hello, Chicago!
Barack Obama has been elected the 44th President of the United States. But will he bring us, the cannabis community, the change we can believe in?
It's an issue of doctors prescribing medical marijuana. I think that should be appropriate.
NORML is asking you to take action and help us hold President-elect Obama to his word with our $10,000 pro-cannabis law reform ad contest.
When I was a kid, I inhaled frequently. That was the point.
Just make a 30 or 60-second video or flash animation that answers the question, what should President Obama do about pot? You can submit as many entries as you like, and winning videos will be featured on NORML's website and television campaigns.
What I'm not going to be doing is using Justice Department resources to try to circumvent state laws on this issue.
The grand prize is $3,500, so enter early and enter often.
Well, I would not punish doctors if it's prescribed, and that may require some changes in federal law.
Contest deadline is January 15th, 2009. Check NORML.org for official contest rules.
The war on drugs has been a utter failure, and I think that we need to rethink and decriminalize our marijuana laws.
President Obama, we couldn't agree more. Marijuana culture is infused throughout America and the world. As we round out the week, we take a look at the 420 phenomenon in movies, TV, music, and sports with former High Times editor and author of Pot Culture, Steve Bloom, in our CelebStoner.com entertainment news. The holiday season is upon us, and here we are once again at the end of a busy week, and joined, as always, on Friday by our Celeb Stoner entertainment reporter, Steve Bloom. Steve, welcome back to the Stash.
Hi, Russ. How are you?
I'm doing good, and speaking of holidays, it's kind of a holiday in our community, I guess. It's Happy Prohibition Repeal Day, I suppose.
It is. Well, at least in terms of alcohol prohibition repeal that happened in 1933. So it's 75 years ago. That's basically being used as a jumping-off point for people in our community to raise questions about marijuana prohibition. So you've seen a lot of probably articles in the last few days. I saw Dale Geringer from California NORML had written a piece about it, and we posted the piece as well for one of our new writers, one of our bloggers, John Biz, who made some good points. He read this piece in the Wall Street Journal that basically referred to alcohol prohibition ending primarily for financial reasons.
Yeah.
So, here's, the same argument, what we've been talking about, pretty much ever since Obama was elected, and since the economy's gone into the tank is, what can we do to revive the economy? And, all of us, who share, love of marijuana and want to change the laws, looking at it and saying, now would be an incredible time to reverse, marijuana prohibition and make marijuana legal, bring it as part, bring it into the economy, into the legal economy, and start making some money, so the government can actually, pay some of the bills, some of its bills that it's in debt. But, so I think a lot of marijuana smokers, would love to kind of see that happen, end the war on marijuana and start putting, marijuana money into the real economy. But, obviously that's our kind of wishful thinking. That's clearly not going to happen.
Yeah, and I'm glad you brought up John Biz, because maybe we should let our listeners know who visit Celeb Stoner from time to time that you now have guest bloggers on Celeb Stoner.
Yeah, it's the latest thing we've done for the site. We're creating, as we go into our third year, we're celebrating our second anniversary. We started the site December 2006, so right about now is our second anniversary, and it's taken a couple of years to sort of get to the point where we are today, but one of the things that we're trying to do now is open the door a little bit more to other voices, other opinions, and branch the site out a little bit, kind of use Huffington Post as a bit of a model that you have so many people, at Huffington Post, so many bloggers writing about so many different subjects, and so we're sort of opening the door at Celeb Stoner for people to do the same thing, but of course, the focus being, marijuana news, the war on drugs, celebrities and drugs, and so on and so forth. So the door is open, and we have, we started with Subcool, who's a cultivation expert. You probably, the listeners have probably seen his, amazing work in High Times and Skunk Magazine, and he has a new book out called Dank. He's really one of the great breeders and experts on marijuana. And then we also have a illustrator named Smarkus, who has his own animation called Three Thug Mice, and he's starting to do some of the mice are kind of like stoner rodents, let's just say, and he's starting to lend some of his episodes to our site. And John Biz is a young guy who contacted me recently, and he seemed like he was on the ball. So we're just kind of looking, for fresh ideas and, and good writing.
Well,
so anybody out there who would love to blog for Celeb Stoner, they could just come to the site and they can email editor@celebstoner.com and we can have a conversation.
That's it. Yeah, expanding the community, getting more voices out there is what it's all about. Now, let's get to the entertainment news. Right top of the page right now, we've got a new member of the All-NFL Drug Bust team right in your backyard, I understand.
Yeah, Sean Ellis, the New York Jets defensive lineman. He's actually kind of been their star lineman for about the last 9 years. He leads the team in sacks. Well, he was sacked by the New Jersey police on Saturday morning. They pulled his car over. This is like, the standard, same old way to get arrested. You get pulled over in your car for doing something illegal. In his case, apparently he sped by a police car at going way a little too fast. It was in the morning. It was like 8:30, so it wasn't, middle of the night, where, they're kind of picking up drunk drivers. But nevertheless, they pulled him over, and he had a lot of illegal things such as, no insurance and no registration. I don't know why these athletes drive around illegally, so to speak, without all the, the proper documentation. And then they didn't really explain it in the news stories. There haven't been too many. There have been a bunch of news stories here in the New York area, but it's kind of leaking out, and there isn't a lot of information as to what happened other than presumably the smell of marijuana, leading to a search. So he was arrested for marijuana possession and possession of drug paraphernalia, in addition to the speeding, the insurance, and those other violations. The interesting thing is that this was not this news of this arrest has only come out today or yesterday. It's in this morning's papers essentially and online. And he got arrested on Saturday morning. He played the Jets game on Sunday. Did not play so well. The Jets lost, and there was no news about it. And I guess it's been overshadowed by the other arrest in New York of a high-profile football player, Plaxico Burress,
right,
who was arrested on the gun charge, and that's been the big news in New York all week long, front page and back page headlines. So maybe the Jets kind of knew with the Burress situation, they could kind of like fly under the radar and just not announce it. And as I've been noting now that there are 8 players, NFL players have been arrested for marijuana or cocaine charges this year, that each situation is handled differently. Some players immediately get suspended. Some players immediately get waived and cut from the team. Other players, they just kind of let it go. And in the case of Sean Ellis, who's a star player, he has not been suspended. He's supposed to be playing the game on Sunday against the 49ers, and so he's being kind of treated with kid gloves, which I prefer, but at the same time, it varies from team to team and player to player based on whatever happens. So we'll see. It doesn't look like he's going to be suspended for this game on Sunday. But, the jury's out to find out really, what the NFL is going to do, what the Jets are going to do, and, whether, this will be dropped or not.
Yeah. Well, now on the television, we had a couple of things that cropped up this week, pardon the pun, but the one that I caught over the weekend, the Cheech and Chong roast on TBS, sure was a lot of fun to see that, don't you think?
It was. I mean, it was just great to kind of see the guys, sitting there in the chairs, being roasted by, a kind of a pretty, fun collection of comics. It's kind of a long time coming for those guys. The fun part of it was that they stepped out of this big baggy big hot plants to sort of start the whole show off, and then they basically it was hosted by Brad Garrett, who's known for
that Everybody Loves Raymond.
Everybody Loves Raymond, and kind of a few other TV shows. It's funny, I haven't really watched too many roasts over the last few years. I guess there's a certain format of the roast where you don't only roast the roastees or the roaster or the one who's being roasted. You roast all the other guys on the panel. So there was a lot of kind of jokes at the expense of Tom Arnold and Brad Garrett's careers and stuff like that. And then they would basically focus on Cheech and Chong. I would say probably the most revealing statement of the 1 hour show was Geraldo Rivera.
Yeah.
Now, what is he doing on the show? He's an old friend of Cheech and Chong, and maybe especially a friend of Cheech's. And he said that he's gotten high with Cheech and Chong in every country in the Western world. He even went on to say something about Tommy smuggling some pot into an African country, and Tommy seemed to get very kind of like uncomfortable. He started talking about illegal activities. He's had enough troubles of his own. And I would say, Penn Jillette said that he's the only person there who's never smoked pot. And Tom Arnold kind of had a joke about, if it wasn't for you guys, I wouldn't have become addicted to pot, which led to my addiction to cocaine, which led to my marriage to Roseanne. There's a lot of kind of people blaming Cheech and Chong for their marijuana use and how it kind of led them down the wrong path. All in good fun. I mean, I would only say that, it was kind of a bit of a motley crew of roasters. They, you would have liked to have seen maybe a few more high-profile comedians joining the panel, maybe a Dave Chappelle or even a Seth Rogen or Jonah Hill or people like that.
Jack Black, you know,
very current. The only really current, they had Greg Giraldo, they had Ralphie May, but Ralphie May was, I think he does comedy for TBS, so I think he was just there for promotional purposes. They had Wilder Valderrama, who was on the '70s show with Tommy, but Wilder wasn't very funny. Shelby Chong, Tommy's wife, who's very funny, they kind of cut her off. They didn't really let her do her kind of like raunchy humor. Maybe she was too raunchy. Interestingly enough, they allowed a lot of kind of curse words to get through, and this was TBS. This is basic cable. That you could say shit and a few other words that I'm not used to sort of hearing on TV. So it was kind of like, it was a little less than stellar, but it was still fun.
Yeah. Now, the other big show, of course, was the documentary on the National Geographic Channel with Lisa Ling. We've been getting commentary in our polls about this as to whether or not it was a good, fair look at the marijuana issue. What did you think about it?
I thought it was pretty much down the middle, and it's a pretty standard approach. Although I will tell you, boy, her visits to those gardens were phenomenal.
Yeah.
I mean, the one that Mark Emery introduced her to, the one in Vancouver, is just unbelievable. These huge tree-sized, marijuana plants. I mean, they're just unbelievable. And the outdoor grow that she visited as well was really spectacular. So, sort of a National Geographic kind of way where they really get inside a story. That was really good. This more scientific approach to it as opposed to the political. The political was basically, looking at both sides, looking at the pros and the cons. The cons, brought her in contact with the police and the DEA and the usual talking heads, telling the world why marijuana should remain illegal. She got, into the plane with the Forest Service, and went down into the Sequoia National Forest. They found some, really kind of small grow, seemed like they're really wasting their time.
Yeah.
And that small grow, pretty spindly plants, So that was kind of less than dramatic. I thought that she was very borderline, but I think I'm sure the job of her, her network is that they weren't going to let her take a side. So, it seemed like even though maybe she wanted to take the side in favor of marijuana, I don't think she was really allowed to.
Yeah, and you wonder how much of that is influenced by editors too. You don't know how much she shot or what she had written in the first drafts that got cut.
Well, her last line was just kind of like very ambiguous. And so she just kind of left you hanging. She wasn't going to take a side, and neither was National Geographic. But I thought it was very artistically photographed. I mean, there was constantly handfuls. I mean, just when they would, kind of like clear a whole table full of buds and put it into a bowl or something like that, where they're weighing it out or something. It was just phenomenal, quality of the marijuana that ran through this program. So, as she said, it's kind of amazing what people are growing these days, and they made it, it's pretty clear in that program, as if we don't know this already. But, for the wider audience that might, see a program not like that and would not necessarily know that much about marijuana, is probably very eye-opening.
Yeah, I always think that the more the mainstream audience just sees it as gardening, the better off we are. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Steve, anything else you want to bring up about the week before we wrap it up today?
Well, we did have a Grammy nomination.
Oh, yeah.
You might want to chat about that for a second. There were a bunch of celeb stoners that were nominated. Snoop Dogg had a couple of nominations. Paul McCartney was nominated for a very obscure record that I had not even been aware of. He did a live album called Amoeba's Secret. It was recorded at the Amoeba record store, I think in either LA or San Francisco, and it's a 6-song EP, vinyl only. He got 2 nominations for that album that nobody has even heard of. There's just covers of his songs. He got 1 nomination for I Saw Her Standing There. It's kind of funny. Neil Young was nominated for Chrome Dreams 2. George Carlin posthumously nominated for It's Bad for You. Lil Wayne kind of led the way with 8 nominations. These are the ones that we're kind of referring to in the celeb stoner world, kind of maybe the more pro-marijuana award nominees. Someone like Lil Wayne has pretty much been on record or has actually been busted. His bus was busted. Jason Mraz, who has a big hit right now with I'm Yours. We featured him recently at Celeb Stoner. He's pro-marijuana. Kid Rock has that song All Summer Long. It's got a marijuana reference in it. That's up for an award. Maroon 5, they've They're my book, Pot Culture. Right. They're up for a song. Katy Perry, who, we just did a piece on her in Flebstoner about her dad being a LSD dealer, so she gets noted on our site. Nas, the controversial rapper. MIA, for Paper Planes was nominated, a song that became very popular again, on the Pineapple Express movie. Brazilian Girls, a local favorite in New York. Mickey Hart, Grateful Dead drummer, was nominated for a world music album. Joan Baez, who's made a comeback with an album on Razor and Tie. Dr. John, Zappa Meets Zappa. And then there's the reggae category, which was surprisingly minus the Marleys, so it opens the door for somebody other than a Marley to win the reggae category. And I'm going to say that I think Burning Spear is going to win that category, but it's Burning Spear, Elephant Man, Heavy D, Lee Scratch Perry, who would be, my pick, but I don't think he'll win, and Intoxication by Shaggy and a Sly and Robbie album. And lastly, the man who usually gets nominated didn't get nominated this year, our good friend Willie Nelson. They did not nominate his album with Wynton Marsalis, which is kind of surprising. So we're keeping our eye on that. Those are sort of our Grammy faves. And of course, the other big news story this week, and actually got a lot of attention, a lot of hits to the website, is the story that we called the time of the ancient marijuana. And it's actually, that story's had two cycles. Last week it broke that there was a stash of marijuana found in a Chinese tomb that dates back 2,700 years. Now, that was discovered earlier this year, and then a research team headed by Dr. Ethan Russo took it upon themselves to analyze the cannabis that was found. There was almost 2 pounds of cannabis found in a tomb in northwestern China, which is the original home of marijuana. So it's kind of fascinating, it was there, and what they found was the marijuana was in pretty good condition. And we posted the photos on the site, and that's gotten a lot of attention. There were actually 2 seeds of all. They actually tried to germinate the seeds. That didn't work. But we're kind of wondering if they tried to smoke the pot. But we kind of got a no comment from Mr. Russo. So we're going to have to wait and see whether he's going to go on record down the road and let the world know what is it like to get high on 27-year-old marijuana, or can you get high on 27-year-old marijuana? So that's a huge story, and I think it's just kind of a great fascination. It opens the door to marijuana history lessons. Where does marijuana come from? How long has it been around in the world? And it's actually had me go running on the web, looking around, and kind of sort of recalling the history that I wasn't 100% familiar with. But it goes back to that place, and it's kind of interesting that with the original use was Chinese, and also the Scythians who were in that area of the world, kind of like just to the west of China, and Russia and Ukraine, and actually it was an original Iranian population, and they were the original users of marijuana as well. They would throw seeds onto the fire and inhale that. Mm-hmm. And in this case, apparently they were doing something else, because what's interesting about Dr. Russo's research is that, he's concluded that it was for psychoactive purposes, for medicinal use, for spiritual use, that they had separated the plants between males and females. So it's pretty interesting that they're aware of that at that, very, very early stage of marijuana cultivation.
Yeah. I can just see the drug warriors using the line that today's pot is so much stronger than your Chinese emperor's pot.
It'd be funny if they came out and said, well, actually, this pot was 20% THC, it's really good stuff.
Yeah.
It aged very well.
I guess so.
Right?
Oh, yeah. Hey, Steve, thanks again for joining us here on The Stash, and have a great weekend. We'll talk to you again next week.
Cannabis, pot,
just say no.
No matter what you call it, it's a huge part of popular culture.
Where'd you learn that, Cheech? Drug school.
You don't need weed school. You just need a copy of the new book, Pot Culture, the A to Z Guide to Stoner Language and Life.
Hey, this is great, man.
Even if you never smoked marijuana.
I never used marijuana. Sorry.
Don't think you smoked marijuana.
I experimented with marijuana a time or two and didn't inhale.
Or you used to smoke marijuana.
I inhaled frequently. That was the point.
Pot Culture by former High Times editor Steve Bloom and Shirley Halperin will answer every question you ever had about marijuana culture.
Has that marijuana made it back up here yet?
Check out Pot Culture, the A to Z guide to stoner language and life at Amazon.com or visit potculturebook.com today.
Too bad, man. I just stopped smoking yesterday.
Here at the NORML Daily Audio Stash, we work hard to change our nation's marijuana laws through education and discussion. But we also take time to relax and unwind with an eclectic mix of pod-safe music from many independent artists. We look for music that speaks to the growing truth about cannabis, or music that speaks to broader themes of freedom, liberty, social justice, equality, and protest. To find out more about the artists and download the music you hear on this podcast, just log on to stash.normal.org. And if you'd like to get your music heard by the online cannabis community, just send us an email at stash@normal.org. Hey, happy Friday, Stashers. Feels good to get the week behind you, doesn't it? Now, imagine the scene. You're out on a Friday night with your lady friend. The booze is flowing like a fountain of youth. All you want to do is get blazed, but you can't because you find that your lady has gone insane. She's on the bar, dancing like a maniac. She's twirling her shirt around her head. She may or may not have just flirted with the bartender. All of this could have been avoided if you just stayed at home and fired up a J. Has this ever happened to you? If so, I strongly suggest listening to this song from Lee Rocker called Crazy When She Drinks. Lee Rocker is better known as one-third of the amazingly awesome Stray Cats. Brian Setzer, the guitar vocalist of the Stray Cats, is one of my favorite guitarists ever, but this isn't about him. Since the band broke up, Lee went on his own way and has been very successful in the rockabilly scene, which still thrives all across the country. And I love me some rockabilly. So grab your fullest jar of pomade, pile your hair into a pompadour, hop into your hot rod, and enjoy the weekend. You can hear more of Lee Rocker's music at his MySpace page, his website, or through music.podshow.com. You can find all those links at our blog at stash.normal.org. This is Lee Rocker with Crazy When She Drinks.
Trouble, it Alan St. Pierre, Executive Director of NORML. Have you heard about the new super pot that's supposedly 20 times more potent than your father's Woodstock weed? Don't believe the hype. Marijuana's THC potency has always varied, even in the 60s and 70s. And the drug czar's numbers are full of, well, exaggerations. While no intoxicant is harmless, cannabis is non-toxic and far safer than alcohol. No matter how much you smoke, of whatever potency, you cannot die of a marijuana overdose. Potency is irrelevant anyway. More potent pot just means you smoke less of it, meaning less harmful smoke in your lungs. This is a prime example of harm reduction in action. Besides, the government already allows the prescription of THC pills. Its commercial brand name is Marinol, and it's 100% potent. Meanwhile, the federal government won't allow dying people to use natural marijuana, no matter what the potency? Does this make sense to you? Learn the facts about pot. Visit NORML.org today.
Joining us again here on the NORML Daily Audio Stash is NORML Board of Directors member George Rohrbacher. George, welcome back to the show.
Hey, it's great to be back.
Hey, I wanted to bring you here to celebrate the 75th anniversary of Repeal Day. This is the anniversary of the day that Utah became the final state to ratify the end of alcohol prohibition, the necessary state to get it over the hump there. So, 75 years ago today, alcohol prohibition ended in America, and I just thought I would bring you on to talk a little bit about that and maybe discuss a little bit about how that prohibition came to end and what parallels we might see here with marijuana prohibition.
Well, one of the things that's useful, I think, is to recognize America wasn't the only country to attempt this. America was the only country to attempt it with the full weight of the federal government behind prohibition. But Finland prohibited alcohol in 1919, same year we did, prohibited hard alcohol, wanting people to drink beer instead. And they gave it up in 1931, 2 years before we did. And there's lots of examples across history of societies trying it and giving it up just simply because it doesn't work.
Yeah, we were talking before the interview about how the time of the prohibition of alcohol found, the rise of the criminal gangs, the creation of the mafia, Al Capone, and all that.
Yeah, well, and it's really an interesting dichotomy because the movement that gave us prohibition, the revivalist movement in the American West, really in the 1820s and 30s. Gave us our first state prohibition. Maine was the first state to go dry, and just before the Civil War. And anyway, in 1919 they put it over on us, and this big moral uplift turned out to be the worst crime-creating, society-breaking idea ever put into law.
Yeah.
Unless, of course, you want to use current prohibition as something that even trumps that, but it's hard to imagine just how it changed society. Al Capone, you just talked about, was reported to have made $60 million a year at the head of his beer empire. And you have to put that in perspective that the average farm worker at that time worked for $1 a day.
Oh, wow.
So $1 a day is what the wage labor guy was getting, and Al Capone was making $60 million selling beer and killing everybody who had any different of opinion.
So we've got, 75 years ago, alcohol prohibition ends, but we're looking at now 71 years of marijuana prohibition if you go back to the Marijuana Tax Act, or if you just want to take it back to Nixon and the real war on drugs that started in the 70s, we're still looking at a couple generations. Why was it, do you think, that it only took, a generation of people in the 20s to figure out that it didn't work, and yet now we've got 3 or 4 generations that we've experienced marijuana prohibition that haven't quite gotten the idea yet?
Well, I think it's because the effects were so dramatic and so immediately evident. Where if you look at the arrest record for marijuana arrests, it's a slow ramping up over decades. I guess you can use the analogy of putting a frog in a pot of cool water on the stove and it's slowly turning it up, and when does the frog decide it's cooking?
Yeah, right. And this is something we discussed at the NORML conference too, about there being 20 million arrests for marijuana. And I remember Dr. Nadelman asking, what's it going to take? 30 million, 40 million? I mean, when do we finally realize that this marijuana prohibition isn't working?
Well, I think it's really a case that America has figured that out. It just hasn't been figured out at the State House yet. And to me, the greatest example in this last election was the medical marijuana results in Michigan.
All right.
63 to 37% is a mega landslide by anybody's calculation. But at the state legislative level, nobody had the guts to put this through. If there was such a huge public feeling on this subject, where are the legislators with the guts to do the work to change this mess?
I think another aspect of marijuana prohibition and drug prohibition in general that makes it so that the people today don't realize it like they did in the 20s with Al Capone is somewhat, that drug prohibition outsources the violence in a way. If people could just spend a week on the northern border of Mexico and realize, the people that are dying down there from the drug war, maybe that would get it into people's heads a little better, do you think?
Oh, well, it's something that this violence and community collapse is offloaded on the poorest sectors of society, those that have the least resources to do something about it, to save their own kids from it. But it's one of my favorite examples of prohibition is the movie Untouchable, starring Kevin Costner as the ever clean Elliot Ness from Treasury, and Sean Connery is the only honest beat cop in Chicago, and Robert De Niro is the nastiest Al Capone ever put on the screen. And one of the last scenes of the movie, Sean Connery's crawling across his living room floor, riddled with bullets, thumbing his rosary, having just been shot by the employee for the local beer distributor. It just it reminded me so much of the conduct of business and prohibition today, that society confuses the violence with no legitimate control of business with the violence having to do with the actual drug itself.
That's right. People can't separate that it's not the marijuana that's causing the problem, it's the marijuana prohibition. And that's why we're here day after day trying to get that truth across to people. Another thing, too, about the end of alcohol prohibition 75 years ago that can't be understated was the effect of women in the movement, in first enacting alcohol prohibition, but then in repealing alcohol prohibition. And this is something you brought up at the NORML conference as well with the Pauline Sabin Award. And we're going to play some audio from that here in a second. But tell listeners just a little bit about that history, how women helped out that movement.
Well, and that is one of the surprising sort of hidden parts of how prohibition became unbuckled, is that I don't know if you're familiar with ancient Greek tragedy. There's a play called Lysistrata. Women get together and say, "The hell with war." Well, essentially, the women in America got together and said, "To hell with prohibition. This is making drunks drunker, shooting up formerly safe neighborhoods, and this is not a fix. This was a disaster."
Right.
And NORML has had a Pauline Sabin Award recipient for about 3 decades now, and she was the one who organized the women's resistance, and Allison Holcomb, who's the director of the Marijuana Project at Washington ACLU, was this year's recipient, and she had some really interesting things to say about Pauline and her efforts in the 30s.
Yeah, well, let's play some of that right now.
Pauline Sabin resigned from the Republican National Committee in 1929 to found the Women's Organization for National Prohibition Repeal. Not because she believed in any individual liberty interest in imbibing alcohol. She did so because she had come to the sad realization that the promise of prohibition had not been delivered. That was a promise that alcohol could be completely eliminated from our society, and that America's youth and America's children and America's communities could be made safer by eliminating liquor. Instead, what Prohibition did deliver were speakeasies, bootleg rock guts, and random violence in homes and neighborhoods that had once been considered safe. In response to the havoc that Prohibition wreaked in our communities, Pauline Sabin mobilized the women. She didn't mobilize the women that were incensed about the Prohibition agents that were raiding the privacy of our homes, or the women that thought that it was unjust that they could no longer go to the saloon on the corner and have a beer after working hard in the factory. She targeted the women who were mothers, who were Red Cross volunteers, who were PTA officers. She targeted them with a message that our homes, our communities, our country would be a safer place if our states were allowed to regulate alcohol, and if we and our families and our schools and our churches were allowed to educate our children about alcohol's real dangers and why they should not use it. That was the message of true temperance. That's what temperance really means. And that was a message that united 1 million women, and in a record time, 4 years after the creation of the Women's Organization for National Prohibition Reform, they repealed the 18th Amendment. They rolled back the evils of prohibition.
Yeah, that's some good stuff. So George, thanks again for coming back on to the Daily Audio Stash, and we'll keep encouraging people to get involved with this movement. Check out NORML.org. There's also a great op-ed in the Wall Street Journal today from Drug Policy Alliance's Ethan Nadelman. So lots of people are talking about this, the end of alcohol prohibition 75 years ago, and we want to end adult marijuana prohibition here today. George, again, thank you so much.
Well, thanks, Russ, and you out there in Stash Land, have a great day.
And a good weekend. Thank you for downloading the NORML Daily Audio Stash, the growing truth about cannabis. We are produced by the National Organization for the Reform of Marijuana Laws in Washington, D.C. Our executive producer is Alan St. Pierre. Our deputy director is Paul Armentano. Our webmaster is Brian Judy. And web production is provided by Red Aphid Interactive Media. As always, you can catch up on the latest information about marijuana at www.norml.org. And you can interact and download from our Audio Stash blog at stash.norml.org. For everyone here at NORML, I'm your host, Radical Russ Belville, hoping all your harvests are bountiful and your encounters with law enforcement are non-existent. We leave you today with another one of our cannabis quotes, this one in honor of the end of alcohol prohibition 75 years ago today, from H.L. Mencken, who in 1924 wrote, "5 years of prohibition have had at least this one benign effect. They have completely disposed of all of the favorite arguments of the prohibitionists. None of the great boons and usufructs that were to follow the passage of the 18th Amendment has come to pass. There is not less drunkenness in the Republic, but more. There is not less crime, but more. There is not less insanity, but more. The cost of government is not smaller, but greater. Respect for law has not increased, but diminished." You said it, H.L. Mencken, and it could be said about marijuana prohibition today. I'm Radical Russ. Thanks for joining us for the podcast. We'll see you next week, and until next time, take care of each other, tokers.